Kimberly, we was just talking before we came on this podcast, and I'm talking about, as a career coach, yes, there's the social impact aspect of me supporting professionals, but I'm also organizing events, right? And I was telling somebody earlier today.
This is Leadership Beyond Burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson. I want to welcome back all my fired up friends. And if you are new here, this is a show that helps leaders heal, lead, and succeed. Now, this episode today is going to be sponsored by Leadership and Resilience Consultants. Today, we have a very special guest here. We have Dr. Kristy K. Taylor. Now, Dr. Kristy K. Taylor, she's also known as the Social Impact Career Coach. She's assisted hundreds of clients in achieving their career goals. She's a military veteran and certified professional career and executive coach with expertise in REBT mindset, life, and emotional intelligence coaching. Dr. Taylor is the founder of WORxK Solutions, LLC, where she specializes in providing career and organizational development. She provides resiliency coaching and workshop facilitation for mission-driven individuals and organizations, utilizing her signature REBT DEIA framework as a change management model. She champions WORxK Solutions LLC as the prescription for mission-driven workforce. Dr. Taylor empowers clients to reach their highest potential by providing supportive, accountable career and coaching and development services. And without further ado, let's introduce Dr. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kimberly. I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, I am very privileged to have you here, and was so excited when I saw that you were a military veteran. Before we get into some of that, I'd love to hear how you believe you bring healing to this world. How do you ease suffering?
Well, you said my title, right? I consider myself the social impact career coach, and I support mission-driven individuals and organizations. And what does that mean? That part of my work, really my career, has really been focused on making a social impact, whether it's my background as an educator or even my military experience. When I was an educator at that time, I was also supporting initiatives like community-based service learning, where we would go out into the communities and get students to feel engaged and empowered. And here I am, fast forward all of these years later, when I started my business in 2016, I was really focused on helping healthcare professionals because this, like the specialization is burnout in the healthcare industry. We are often overtasked, right, with patients, and it can easily lead to burnout. Well, I did that for a number of years, and then fast forward in 2022, I started to relaunch as WORxK Solutions. So my old business was called Healthcare Consulting. Then I relaunched this WORxK Solutions, and I said, taking that background from healthcare, so we want to be the prescription for individuals and social impact. And that's not just in healthcare. When I look around at the totality of my career and working in higher education or supporting nonprofit entities, one thing that we all have in common, whether it's healthcare, education, nonprofit, faith-based, anybody in the social impact sector, is that we're often dealing with shortage fundings, personnel shortages, all of those things. And if we're supporting clients, whenever you're doing this work with social impact, you're dealing with clients who are suffering from some systemic issue that can really take a toll on you personally, right? So when you ask me, what do I do to make an impact? I provide career coaching that incorporates and takes into account the emotional impact of the burden that we carry in this social impact sector. And that includes providing support for resiliency and burnout prevention.
Okay. Love that. And it seems like when I hear everything about you and what you just said, it seems like you had to implement your own strategy on your business because I believe as healthcare professionals, we know this system and then we create our businesses and we just recreate the same system until we look at like this, wait a minute, this is a little bit chaotic and crazy. Why am I doing this? Did you find that's what you did to kind of pare down and
Kimberly, we was just talking before we came on this podcast, and I'm talking to you about, as a career coach, yes, there's the social impact aspect of me supporting professionals, but I'm also organizing events, right? And I was telling somebody earlier today, when we were launching we try to acknowledge like things like this Mental Health Awareness Month, so we try to do events like around that, something similar in Women's History Month, Black History Month. We've done things to recognize that, and it can really be chaotic trying to do your daily routine and organize these events. And here you are as an entrepreneur, right? With my leadership cap on as an entrepreneur, telling people to be resilient, telling people, literally teaching workshops on burnout, and then have to sit and go, now wait a minute, I have to live and practice what I preach, because really the foundation of this business really came from the career experiences that I've had, right? Where I myself was burning out, and then also supporting individuals who were burning out. But I have to make sure that I'm proactively taking care of myself as an entrepreneur and leader, because I don't just do this, right? I'm still a military reservist. I got 100
oh,
that work up under me as an OPSO. I'm there to support my commander. And I think about, like, there are times, like literally after drill, I have to say, it's a Monday, I have to go back to my full-time job, and I have to say, okay, I'm working from home today, because you have to be proactive in taking care of yourself and practicing what you preach. So yes, wholeheartedly, right? The root of it. If I could just tell you a little bit of my story.
oh, I'd
Yeah.
love that.
So I'm telling you the surface of this, right? Of like, okay, I launched this business in 2016, and I'm helping healthcare providers get quoted for saying these terrific things about burnout. But then fast forward, 2019, some things happened in my career that really transitioned me, right? And I had been dealing with some things in my work environment for a number of years. Then I just think in 2020, end of 2019, 2020, it came to a head. And I shared this story because in early 2020, I found myself, I made a decision. Actually, I made a decision in December 2019. I was like, I can't continue on in this environment anymore. And everybody knows, Dr. Kimberly, you got Dr. Taylor over here. You present this perfect facade on the outside of, people, all of these young people are looking up to you. You're running this business. You're working in this leadership position in higher education. So you are smiling. There's this facade there. But then yet in 2020, I find myself, Dr. Kristy Taylor, sitting on her mama's couch, sleeping in the room that she grew up in at 37 years old, sitting on my mama's couch, crying repeatedly because I don't know what just happened. This career that I've built for myself, this life that I've built for myself, I watched it burn down, right? And those very things that I was espousing to people, I'm like, was I living in that? And I wasn't even that deep into, I was getting quoted for saying things around healthcare burnout and all of that stuff, but I wasn't deep into it as I am now in terms of like really, doing the workshops and stuff, right? But I went to a therapist, and she said, Kristy, you literally had a nervous breakdown with all the stuff that happened to you. You had a nervous breakdown, and you just worked. You kept the facade up. You worked right through it like it didn't happen. And I
Mm-hmm.
look back over that 7-year period where I was dealing with all of this trauma, and finally just, like I said, I got to let this go. I said to myself, I will never let that happen again. And so this is when I started speaking out to say, okay, this is not just a thing that's happening to healthcare providers. It's easy to publish an article and sound profound about it, right? But when it really happens to you and you look back, I'm like, this is impacting so many people that we feel pressured to keep up the facade of perfectionism, especially as Black women, right?
Yeah,
Keeping
absolutely.
up the facade of perfectionism, and then you fall apart and don't even realize it. And I'm like, how did I get there? Now, I went to a few therapy sessions. I didn't have to go to many, because when we talk about being resilient, I am. But I would encourage people, one, if you need to go to therapy, go. But two, recognize the signs of what's happening to you up front, right? Because that's what I was in. I was just in survival mode for almost a period of 7 years.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that absolutely is, that prolonged stress is absolutely the definition, the nice fertile ground for burnout, right?
Yeah.
And I also feel, and I don't know if you agree with it, that there is a grieving or a death because you're fighting against acknowledging that this world that you carefully constructed may not be feasible, and that you need to take apart your Legos and make something else different. Do you find that as well?
Kimberly, I still am dealing with it. Last night when we were doing and I don't know when this is going to air, but like I said, this month we've been doing the Mental Health Matter Summit, and one of the young ladies that I had on, she was a therapist, and she said something that was so powerful. She said, "I said, what is your final words with?" She said, "Please heal." That she said, "Please heal." And after the event, I was thinking about that. I said, "Now here I am, that reset." How I see myself as a coach, because before, up until then, from 2016 to 2020, I was really just I was making comments, a little bit of research, but I was really just doing surface level, like career coaching, transactional type of career coaching economy. I do your resume. But then after this happened, I'm like, I cannot let this happen to me again. And I will definitely be more holistic in how I support my clients moving forward. But even last night, just as recently, I was sitting here thinking, I said, I'm still healing. I'm still the life that I had constructed for myself, exactly as you just stated, this perfect facade of Dr. Taylor, future college president, future dean, all of these things that I had did to build and cultivate this career for myself. What is it when you have to decide to move on, pick up the pieces of your life, and decide to move on and do something that's totally different, the same yet different? There's still a lot of hurt in that, right? But the part of that is the process is trusting God. I've gone from living not that I live, in despair or anything here in DC. I live a nice life, but I had a nice, quiet 3-bedroom home in the suburbs. I had a career that was set. I didn't have to think about retirement. That was going to be the rest of my life. Right. But then picking up in the middle of that and just saying, my God, I got to start. So let me get on. We talk a lot about manifestation, right? And you can manifest anything. But what about manifesting yourself in alignment with what God has for you? Because I can manifest 1,000. I could have manifested a dean, and I got to do all that stuff, right? In higher ed. But now I sit in my cubicle, I make more money. I'm peaceful. I'm running my business as well. But I will say that even though I shifted, there's still a level of hurt there. I'm still healing from all the things that happened, as well as a piece of disappointment that, like, it was supposed to go this way. This is what I had constructed for myself in the life that I was going to build. And so with that, you can burn your mind out. I would say when we talk about burnout, you can burn yourself out even with your own thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. That's such a tender, just teachable moment that you shared, because there's so much that people go through and they're just unaware. We just keep going on. And I even have to say for myself that I had to do some of that, and I was telling some of my colleagues, I was like, you know what, this stuff I do for other people, it works so much. It works when you use it on yourself too.
I'm like, we coaches will tell people, hey, focus on your mindset. And again, the way that I had to transition my business is like, I'm speaking on this stuff, but am I really speaking and living it? And up until that point, the work that I was doing was really transactional, right? But now, when I initially came back, I focus on mindset coaching. And just in case you guys don't know what REBT is, it's rational emotive behavioral therapy. And that gets you to challenge irrational beliefs and bring things to the surface and not put off, the external locus of control factors. It's really getting you to focus on you as an individual, the internal factors that you can change in terms of your mindset and how you go about speaking into your own life and dealing with things, and recognizing the reality of that it's a process, right? That change is a process, but you have to be proactive about how you manage your mindset. And that means also being actively aware of how external factors are in the decisions that you're making are impacting your daily life. Because it's from a leadership perspective, that's how we end up in a place of burnout, because life is going to life. If you're working in a social impact job, or whether it doesn't really even matter, any job, you're going to always be overloaded. Things are always going to come at you. And I don't believe, from a coaching perspective or any advice perspective, you can jump in here, Kim, it's like being realistic. I don't think, telling clients, oh, just take a deep breath and it's all going to go away. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to learn how to manage yourself. And that's why sometimes people look at me crazy when I'm like, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm just going to stay in a hotel room, or, or I'm just going to stop right here and I'm going to take a walk, because that's me proactively managing myself, my mindset, to prevent burnout. And that's kind of how I approach with clients. Always start where you are, because you might not have an hour in a day to meditate, but you might have 5 minutes. That's a start, right? Use what you got. Start where
Absolutely.
you are.
And I'd love for you to distinguish, because one of the things that always irks me when you get two people talking and it's very shop talk, and then the average person's like, what they talking about? Let me Google this, and they may not get the right thing. So I'd love for you to share the difference between transactional work, both from a coach and a client perspective, um, and organizationally. Because one of the things that I've often told clients is like, oh yeah, my spouse is going to therapy and things are going to be better. And I was like, well, keep in mind, what you think they're going to therapy for, what they actually going to therapy for could be completely different. And they could just be doing surface level stuff and just saying they're doing the work. So I'd love for you to share that.
Okay, so let's start with the example of the client, because I think this is most simplistic, right? So when I talk about the way that I transitioned this business to more holistic career coaching, transactional for me as a career coach is when you, Kim, you come to me and say, hey, Dr. Kristy, I want to get a resume, LinkedIn, bio. Like, those are transactional. Those are just services that I provide. Where we move into more of the holistic piece, and less of the services, when I start asking you questions about, is it what's really going on in terms of where do you want to go in your career, and what's keeping you from getting to that next level? What is your work environment like? What are you looking for in your next work environment? So we started talking, and then we started unraveling the pieces of this fabric, and we find out that maybe you don't have the confidence. It's your mindset. It's the work environment that you have, or maybe and then when I ask you questions about what might be impeding your what your mindset, how that might be affecting your career development growth, we start again getting into things that happened in the past. So it's really doing that deep rooted work. And sometimes I have clients, I have to say, you got to get off the hamster wheel, because you're not going to be able to move forward in your job search process or get to where you want to go. Now, I really do this from a career context, right? But that's really anything that we're pursuing in life, any goal that we're pursuing. If we don't get off the hamster wheel and understand the deep root cause of why we feel the way we feel about something, that takes us from transactional to the holistic piece, right? And then from an organizational perspective, you mentioned my framework in my bio, rational emotive behavioral therapy techniques. I want to be clear, because I'm not a therapist. I use the techniques of challenging irrational thoughts and partner with DEIA. So I'm going to use that example for organizations, because in organizations, you'll see a lot of times that they'll say, hey, we are doing the work of diversity, equity, inclusion. Something big happened, they'll hire somebody to be director of diversity, equity, inclusion. That person ends up, being in a position of title, and then maybe doing some Title IX work or something that they really ain't there to do in the human resources department, right? But what really happens when, and I mentioned this earlier in my book that's coming out, I use a term called decatastrophization. What really happens in organizations when we start seeing beyond, let's start peeling back the layers of this banana, right? And start asking the questions. It's not just you hiring a director for the DEIA. And I will say, I don't build DEIA programs. I use this framework as a change management model, because when we get to the root core of what's happening in organizations, you realize that it's individual behaviors, is those biases, those unconscious biases, is our personal experiences as individuals that shape how we deal with other individuals, that impacts organizational culture. And I start the conversation from a DEI perspective, because when you're dealing with issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that often can cause an emotional response, because people are, they get offended easily. And my personal perspective on that, and based on the research that I've done, that if you can facilitate conversations around DEIA and as a change management model, then you can, as a leader, you can facilitate conversations around anything. And that's including recognizing within your organization where, what's burning people out. What are some of the irrational beliefs within our organizational culture that are impacting? And that might be that I gotta stay by the phone all day to make sure I answer my boss. I gotta continue working beyond my 8 to 5 so that I can prove myself because my work need people are getting burnt out. So that framework applies to every situation. So to answer that question, those examples that I'm giving you is really just looking at it like peeling back the layers of banana and just saying it goes from what we're doing here on the surface to really taking a deep dive and talking about individual and personal accountability as well as the things that impact in our organizational culture and climate.
Right. And I want to throw another log on that organizational fire. When you give someone a title and KPIs, but you don't give them funding or organizational support to actually meet those objectives and those goals.
Yeah, it's just a band-aid, right? A lot of times with those types of positions, you think that I'm going to be able to, from a leadership perspective, we know this, Kim, using the power of psychology of if I give them the title and the job role, they'll feel good. They'll make them feel good about themselves. And even from a media standpoint, and that's a good, we see a lot with DEIA when stuff happens and these big organizations come out and they say, we're going to appoint, we are very aware of the, big words like the systematic and systemic issues that are affecting our nation today. And we want to play a role in this. We're going to appoint this DEI, director of DEI and emergence and inclusions and Jesus, right? And you put these people in positions, they don't have the title, but then they have all the responsibility to deliver, but really no power. And it's, even though, I'm speaking from the context of DEIA, it really is any type of position where you're putting folks there without the resources that they need to be able to do the work and be successful at it. They're there. And that's another hit on your organizational culture, because now you put a leader there that can't even achieve the KPIs that you've given them because they don't have the resources. You're looking for them to be dynamic, but you putting that pressure on them, again, that leads to burnout. And think about it. Somebody said something really very eye-opening to me today about how middle management, if they feel a certain way, right, the processes are replicated because they're going to push that down to the folks they're supervising. And the folks that they're supervising, that's what they push out to the customers, because the middle management is burned out and frustrated. They don't feel like they have the resources because it's being pushed to them from the top down. Then your frontline workers are going to feel that. And then that's the kind of quality that you get from your customers. So burnout, we often speak of it from the standpoint of just individuals, right?
Right.
But to your point, is the burnout and resiliency factor is really holistic and organizational because it's part of our culture. And we have to just think it's not just about talking to people about journaling and meditation and create your burnout praying, all of the things that we do to sell our workshops, right? You got to really go in there and do the work of organizational change, because it's something in that organization where you put unrealistic expectations on people that's making them feel pressured to perform.
Right.
And that's burning them out with no consideration that these people have lives outside of work.
Absolutely. And you kind of opened the door. I wanna dig into this one. With your background in education and with the DEIA framework you're using, and now we're seeing this push especially in education. I think Harvard was one of the examples where some of those big donors and are like, oh, if you're teaching this nonsense, if this is part of the curriculum, I'm not giving you the money.
Oh, it's right on the tip of my tongue. What I know what you're talking about. It's right on the tip of my tongue because they have made this thing so political, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm like,
instead of humanistic, it's what the framework is.
Because I know what you're talking about, but I'll since I can't remember off the tip of my head what it is, I'm just going to speak in generalizations here, right?
Right.
Now, I'm a historian. That's a lot of people don't know that about me. I teach American history in addition to the 15,000 degrees that I have. But American history is one of them. And one of the things about doing this work is why I've been able to teach DEI-based cultural competency classes and be successful at it is because, one, I'm not going to bite my tongue and tell you the truth, but I also don't approach it from a victimization standpoint. I'm just saying from a historical standpoint, this is what happened, right? Now, as somebody who is taught in K through 12 and college, I can tell you that no teacher is standing up there teaching some type of theory. Critical race theory is what it is. That's what it is. No teacher is teaching critical race theory. We got in Florida right now people rewriting the history books saying that that is the African Americans, we benefited from slavery too. Now,
And do you remember when Texas? I'm sorry, I'm getting excited about it. In Texas, a mother, because sometimes we're so busy we can't see what our kids are learning sometimes, but she had to petition the. She tried to sue the publisher because they were saying that slaves were immigrants. The
yeah,
enslaved people were immigrants. They just
yeah, I saw that was
decided
reading
to come.
in a textbook, and I'm like, well, at some point, right, there has to be. It's not that we're teaching critical race theory. At some point, nobody's like in the classroom. They just teaching history, and what I encourage educators to do is not get your. One thing I can honestly say about having a degree in history is that we're taught to be objective and not subjective, right?
Mm,
And it can be very hard to be objective when you teach history. You got to just teach history as it happened. And so when we're dealing with even discussions on DEIA, look, this is what happened. It's
right.
history, right? And so we got to use it as an opportunity to learn. But what has happened is that people have made this political because oh my God, Kim, I could just go on a deep dive with you that I can't do in this podcast. But this is what happens when people make stuff political. You get books being banned that we've been able to read. Who is banning The Color Purple? And their eyes was watching God. Who's out here banning these type of books as being offensive
Yes.
when these were literally once books that we read as part of a literature class, right?
Right.
But people are looking for ways to politicize stuff because you don't want to just actually acknowledge like, hey, this happened in history.
Right.
And right. And when you're having conversations around like when we talk about DEIA, I've been seeing, I believe in Florida, they've even pulled, you can't even take a class no more. They're not even funding classes on
Right.
gender development and all of this stuff. All that stuff is political. You got to have those discussions. But what I would encourage us as leaders to do is to learn how to facilitate these types of conversations in a way that doesn't spark emotion, that acknowledges the difference in everybody, but we're not going to change the way that history happened, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. It happened just like this. This is what it is, right? But how do we build and move on from that by still acknowledging that it happened?
And one of the things I'm really curious about and why I'm pulling on some of your educational framework is when they are experiencing direct impact on their programs and possibly because you lose $1 million donor,
Yeah.
like that's a significant impact on how you do things. So how do you stand up as a leader in this educational or whatever organization you're in, and people's, whether it's the government or whoever wants to start pulling funding, if you believe fundamentally like this is what needs to happen, whether you standing on business about the history or you're standing on business about it being, this is just what's human, this is what's right to do, this is my moral obligation. How do you remain steadfast when economically you're being challenged? Or even at some universities that I teach them, when students are balking back, like enough with this stuff.
It's
I just want to
happening.
learn whatever.
Well, listen, this is no easy question to answer because I've
I
dealt
know.
with this from a educational leadership standpoint, knowing that I have to fill those classes. So we in education will say, hey, we're nonprofit, but the bottom line is if I don't fill them seats up, these teachers ain't gonna get paid. Y'all can be out here protesting if you want to, but it's about being politically savvy. And I'm not going to sit here and give you a canned answer to that because the truth is, if you're going to stand on business, you're going to stand on business. Think about like folks who fought in the civil rights movement. And guys, when we talk about this, we are still on this topic of burnout and resiliency because
Right.
how do you think people become resilient? I mean, when we talk about the civil rights movement, people who did those sit-ins had to know before they go, they trained themselves and educated themselves. Like, you got to be prepared not to respond back emotionally. We're going to sit at these chairs and we're going to stand on business. And
Right.
that's what it is. And so as an organization, if you're going to make the decision to say, and I will say it's a tangle web we weave, because when you're in a position, for example, if I'm at a privately funded institution with a large endowment it's easy for me to make those types of decisions about where I'm going to do and how I want to approach this and how I want to engage in politics, right? But and I know the Florida system well, because this is where I come in, when you're in an environment where even as a teacher, you can have funding pool or be fired from your job because the governor has appointed all of these board. It is a hard landscape to navigate, and I have to be honest with you, Kim. I'm not really sure in that context of if a state-funded institution going to be like, I'm standing on business, because these people trying to keep their jobs, right? So I have to think that you have to, I look at it from the standpoint of like, we got to be realistic in what we expect from these institutions, because a lot of the decision making is not even in their control. Their boards are appointed by state governments. They're being regulated in terms of what they can say, what they can and cannot do. Versus if you're at a private institution, yeah, you might need the money, but you have a lot more flexibility to really stand on business in terms of, okay, I'm not going to engage in navigating that. But whatever it is, and I would tell young people this too, because we got a lot of protests going on that I don't get myself involved in. But what I will say is that we have a lot of first world perspective and protest. Like, if you're gonna stand on business, if you're gonna starve yourself to death, or whatever it is you try to do in terms of this social impact work, you gotta recognize that with every decision that you make, there's gonna be a consequence or response, positive or negative, right? And we tend to approach things here in the United States from a first world perspective, like, I'm gonna starve myself to death, but can you send me some DoorDash? The least you can do is feed me. No, if you're gonna do it, you do it and you stand on it, right? And you deal with all the consequences and pushback from it, but you follow it all the way through. So that same response I'm giving to you is the same response that I put out there to leaders, right? But I'm saying that as somebody who's been a leader in higher education, knowing that a lot of questions may come from like my faculty in terms of, well, why y'all not doing this? Why is the organization taking this stance and not taking this or not doing it? It's because there's so many political factors that are tied into this that you may not see. And presidents, people of boards, they have to be careful. But also you might be a leader in a situation where you don't even control or have any feedback from you're literally working for that board who's been appointed, who a political appointee who can determine whether you keep a job. So it's so many things within that I wish I could just give you a polished answer to it. But I understand the nuances of it so well that, I can just, the only thing I can say is that if you're going to stand on business and be prepared for the consequences that's associated with it, right? And the pushback that you might receive. I don't really see a lot of public institutions doing that as much as I see private institutions, because they have a different type of funding, right?
Right. And I'm glad you said that, because I really wasn't because I feel like we are trying to discover, like, what is the path? How do we make things work in this constantly changing, turbulent world? Yes.
Yeah, there's no blanket solution to this stuff, right? And we talk about building resilient organizations, like, or we start with building resilient individuals. And so I, as an individual, I might not can change the organization, but I know what I can stand for individually. But again, it's a lot. You got to be, if you're going to make a decision about something that you're going to do, you got to be prepared to deal with the consequences. And I think using the civil rights movement as an example is perfect, because before them young people went in there, they educated themselves, they trained themselves not to respond emotionally to certain things, and they were polished when they went in. Versus me and you go in there, maybe you spit on me, it's going to be over with that day.
And my sister actually had that happen to her, and she's a Detroit police officer, and she was in the car with my mother. I don't know why this came up to me, and a little traffic hit and somebody got out of their car and spit on her, and my mother had to do everything in her power not to let her get out, but she did file charges on him. But yeah, that's a lot, because I think people forget that these during the civil rights movement there was a huge educational component. It really was quite sophisticated.
Yeah. And right now what we're seeing is a lot of like emotional components, because I'm screaming live from TikTok, I'm protesting. Can y'all send us some food? Like, come on now.
I haven't seen that.
But listen, we're talking about from a context of building being resilient.
But I can't go an hour.
When we talk about being resilient, right, it really is, it's like that part you mentioned about education and learning to understand what to expect if we're going to be, and especially with me working in the social justice and social impact space, you know, you asking me questions that's not even a lane that I've even decided to go down. Right? I'm here to empower you but why can't I answer those questions? Because I've been there. You know what I mean? From a social engagement standpoint, but just understand, guys, when we're having this discussion, we're talking about, yeah, we're laughing and talking about the civil rights movement, but the thing that Kim said that's so powerful is the education piece. If you want to be an individual or resilient organization, you really do have to educate yourself, and understand that if I make this decision to do this, these are the possible consequences. When I was a dean, before we presented something to our higher level leadership, one thing I would do is I would organize my teachers like we were protesters, but we wouldn't. I would sit in the office. They say, Kristy, I have this idea for something. And I would sit in the office and I would ask them every question, right? Because you don't want to just tell people, okay, it sounds good. I would ask them every tough question. I would punch, holes in everything. Because I said, before we go in this office, we're going to be prepared to answer everything that come our way. We had trained ourselves like the civil rights movement so that we can do what we needed, advocate for. And so I encourage, when you talk about building resilience, is to educate and train yourself. And not just about the protest, but even if it's just being resilient in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's that OPSO coming out.
Yes, it is.
And for you all that don't know what that is, that's operation and plan. So they have to prepare for all of these contingencies and make sure that everything happens and goes as it's supposed to go, because the whole mission, it can be won or lost by operations and supply.
Exactly. There's the stuff I do as an LRO. You guys might not know LRO, logistics readiness officer in the Air Force. It's a big part of my life. Now I can say though, I will say that for where I work, I have some fantastic people. My enlisted team that supports and leads many of those initiatives. And for me, it's just a matter of just showing up and being able to provide some strategic perspective and direction. But I have to give credit where it's due. But you're exactly right. That's how I think, right? It's individuals, because we say in the military, mission first, people always. And you see it in my bio, say mission-driven organization. And I was trying to figure, where did I get this word from? And then I was thinking today, I was like, it really comes from my experience and background in the military, because we say mission first, people always. Mission, and I just say mission focused, right? Mm-hmm. But when we talk about resiliency, yes, not reacting out of emotion, educating yourself, and that includes, hey, I need to just take some time for me. What would be the consequences associated if I just said no to that, right? I'm just talking about down to like the individual level. If I just said no to that, would the work still be there tomorrow? What's the consequence associated with me just taking a break?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we've talked about everything today from protests to, but it's all part of the discussion from, resiliency and burnout, because it's about educating and empowering ourselves to reach that next level.
Right. And I love when we talk about educating and empowering as well, is when we make career decisions, just bringing it kind of back to your career coaching aspect, is that it also affects our personal, right? Mm-hmm. Where we're going to live. Are the other people in my life aligned with this decision I'm about to make? So if I go home and say, oh, baby, I just decided
I want to move to Saskatchewan, because people make decisions like that.
Right. Can we keep the car? Can we keep the house? What do you mean you quit your job? So putting all of that together as well is because some people may not be happy with those choices.
And that's what we talk about when we say holistic career, decision making. Yeah, and I'm speaking from the burnout perspective, but when I really work with clients now and take them deep dives and find out the hamster wheels that they may on, that's what I'm talking about. You're making career decisions about, I want to be a horseback rider. That's great, but maybe we need to, while you're training for horses, maybe you might have to work at Burger King for a little while, because you got to get a job right now. Right. I'm never going to be that person that's going to be like, yes, quit your job and pursue your passion. I'm like, do you got some money saved? You know what I mean? What strategies can we put in place for you to be able to continue doing what you're doing while you make preparation for your transition? Or is this an opportunity for you to upskill yourself so you can prepare yourself for that next role? Now, I know that you want to be a dancer or a ballerina, but maybe you can take some dancing classes while you still work your full-time job. I know that you used to be a CEO at a company, but right now your lights are off. So how about we just go get a job, right? And that might mean, I promise, listen, Dr. Kristy Taylor, I never forget having to get a part-time job working at CVS because I was broke. And so one of my somebody used to work for me. I was sitting at the register. And somebody worked for me. He came in. He was so shocked to see me. And it was my first day of working. Nobody showed up, so I was running the cashier by myself. It was so funny because he walked up and he took a step back. He was like, "Dr. Taylor, I thought you were a dean. What happened?" I mean, he said that.
He just had to emphasize.
Yeah, I know. It's already embarrassing enough. But it's like never being ashamed to be in that place. I keep that CVS name tag to remind me because that was a part of my life where I was like, oh my God, that was the start of the burn down. When I found myself like, what just happened here? I'm like, I got to get a second job. So I'm just like, well, I used to be one. So paper or plastic. You know what I mean? And that's me with a doctorate degree, sitting up there having to do that. No, you really, there's dignity in work. There's dignity in taking a step back because I think, when we have a discussion on resiliency, part of that is just like people want to sell you a bag of tricks and gimmicks to say, yes, resiliency means that I wake up every morning and I meditate and I write in my journal every day. Yes, that's a part of it. It's all great, good. But resiliency also means being able to, when you're in a situation where you have hit rock bottom, is not having so much pride where you can't say, man, I got to start over. And see, that was a start over before the start over. That was a story that happened even before the 2020 thing where I found myself on the couch. That was just part of it, right? I think that happened around 2016, 2017, right before I got a commission. I was in the military because I had no plans to go back to the military. But I was like, I'm working at CVS. What? Really? Really, I got to do something different. And I made the decision, okay, I'm gonna go back to the military. And this is what I mean, when we talk about faith, because I went to the military, signed up in January. I have this email I sent my sister at 3 a.m. in the morning, January 26, 2016. I woke up, I was crying because I was like, God, this was not part of my plan. I've been out for almost 6 years, not part of my plan. And I sent her a message at 3 a.m. in the morning. I was driving up to the MIPS to check in for my physical department. And I said, don't worry, in 6 months, it's going to be different. It was January 2016. I showed up to my base in March 2016. The day I showed up, they said, hey, Kristy, the day I showed up, it was like, hey, we're having a commissioning board to be officers. I was like, I don't want to really do that. I'm just here back. I'm just back. I'm going to stay out something. But by the end, I had met so many people that was like, hey, we want to commission. You should go for that board because you got a doctor you need to do it. By that Sunday, I was like, I'm going to put together a package. I put together the package. I had this lieutenant colonel, I cannot remember her name. That lady coached me. She took me under her wing and coached me. Lieutenant Colonel Weiss. She coached me, busted me, made me. I ain't been in the military in 6 years. I did that board, and by July, I got a call that said, hey, you were the number one person. Literally, you scored 100 on your board. Commissioned me and changed my life. We never know what God gonna have for us. You got to just, that's part of being resilient is keeping an open mind. Because I'm telling you, people like, you need to do that. I'm like, I'm just back here just trying to get myself together because I wasn't feeling too great about working at the CVS. But, just keeping an open mind, that's part of the journey. Right. Being resilient.
Right. And one of the things that I admire most when people recognize that the path they chosen wasn't the path that they chose. Is especially even if they've invested so much time, money, effort, multiple degrees, and then they're like, why am I doing this again? Oh, that's right. My father wanted this.
I think sometimes we get caught up, and I go back to, what, like I say, I'm still healing from the educational experience, but sometimes I ask myself those things I used to dream about, like I'm going to be this or that. I'm going to be a college president. I'm going to be an HBCU. I was so worn out by the time I moved to DC with education. Those times the kids at Howard, they were protesting. And I said, oh my God, I just think that I'm going to just work my little job and wait till it's over. Wait till the protest. Because I was like, I came up here like I'm going to go work at Howard. That's always been my dream.
I'm going to change the world.
Yes. I'm like, they got the kids protesting. I'm like, baby, I done dealt with that for almost 20 years. I think I'm gonna just work my little job and be. And I think about, like, all the people that fed into me, just because people see potential in you. Again, I'm not saying that it was
Mm,
but sometimes we have people that speak into our life because they see so much potential in us and our leadership. When we take that on, it's like, yes,
yes.
that is my dream. And then we start to live that persona of, based on what people are telling me that I can and should be, and we find ourselves upset because when I think about it, yes, those are things that I work for, but I was working for them because I had so many people telling me, here's what you could be, here's your potential. And they were such great leaders. I aspired to fulfill their vision.
Yes.
But when I think about the work that I do in social impact now, I'm so fulfilled.
Right.
But I'm still dealing with the bitterness of me not getting to. It's a weird feeling because I know that I was doing it based on another vision, right?
Right.
The vision that was fed to me. But because
Right.
of me and a type A personality, I still wanted to get there. And I'm mad that I didn't get there. But again, transitioning, peaceful, more money, doubled your salary, really more than doubled your salary. Uh, and then being able to really do impact work like I'm doing through my business and through the organization that I work for full time.
Right. So partially is detoxing from what the societal or familial expectations, sometimes your own interpersonal expectations, because they aren't aligned with really what you need, what's going to feed your soul rather than what.
I did some research when I moved to DC. I was going to school. I was trying to max out my GI Bill, and I was going to Liberty University. This is where I went and got my degree in education, and I was still dealing with my own anger. But I was like, why is it that we as Black women we want these titles, right? And it's like the statistics shows, like maybe about 2% higher than white women. We seek titles. We're very, like,
Right.
we're title heavy. Look at our church. We'll go, this is the deacon of the deaconess, or our HBCUs. This is vice president of admissions, assistant vice president. I'm like, hey, but 500 people in this school. How many assistant vice presidents and layers do we need? But we do the same thing. And I'm like,
Stop.
wow, we are obsessed because in the systems that we created for ourselves as Black people, right? This was where we had the power dynamics within our churches, within our schools, but even
Right.
that radiates out in the corporate world. Why do we seek titles? Why is it that I felt like that even though I was already Dr. Taylor and already doing this work, why did I feel like I wasn't enough? Why did I have to have the title of, I got to be the president? Or I still do
Right.
that now. I'm like, I'm gonna change. This is what they see me as at my job. I'm gonna change my title to this because this is what they say I am, and that's much higher than what you say I was hired for. I'm like, and I have to really watch myself, right? Because
Hmm.
we title heavy. We do it in our. I ain't gonna speak on that too much, but we do it in our sororities and stuff too, right?
Hmm.
All of the. I'm like, what did this mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah. What
Um,
does that show up as?
yeah.
So I have absolutely loved our conversation, and I want to give you the opportunity because we talked about so much. What would you issue as a challenge to our audience as individuals, and or if you wanted to as an organization?
I think for individuals and organizations, I'll start with it's really all the same, but I'll speak from an organizational context when I start organizations. But at an individual level, I think you really have to. I challenge you to define success for yourself. Define success for yourself, because if you define success for yourself, that's going to take a lot of pressure off of you. When we talk about this whole context of burnout and resiliency, a lot of times we're putting pressure on ourselves to be this vision of what we thought, and be open-minded. So define success for yourself and to be open-minded. And I would say that to organizations. Now, organizations don't have the advantage of they can define as holistically as a team, as a one vision. You can define success for yourself, but take a deep dive as an organization. I challenge you to take a deep dive to go beyond the surface, right, of what's really happening into your organization, and take time to understand how individual behavior contributes to what is creating and impacting your organizational culture. I challenge leaders to really self-reflect. Are you living the life that you are preaching, right? Are you creating an environment that's a dynamic environment where people really feel comfortable within your organization? How does your own behavior impact your organizational culture, right? Even to how you are showing up as a leader. How does that affect your organization? Do a lot of self-reflection, right? Because that's the first step to change, is individual behavioral accountability before we can get into this organizational dynamic, right? Start where you are. So I'll stop right there because I'll share wisdom all day on that topic.
Well, thank you so very much for all of that. We thoroughly enjoyed having you here, Dr. Kristy K. Taylor, and we'll definitely have your information in the comments section for those who want to follow you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. This has been Leadership Beyond Burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson. You can find us here every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 2 p.m. Pacific. And we'll see you next week.